Panic erupted at 30,000 feet. A simple boarding pass dispute spiraled into pure chaos aboard Flight 480U. One flight attendant, armed with unchecked authority and malicious intent, targeted an exhausted black woman sitting quietly in seat 4A. Accusations flew. Threats echoed through cramped aisles. Passengers gasped, recording every shocking second on their phones. But nobody knew who this quiet woman truly was. She wasn't just another economy ticket holder. She held secrets that would soon detonate, shattering careers instantly. Moments after a humiliating eviction attempt, tables turned completely. Retribution arrived swiftly, leaving an entire crew jobless before landing. The rain was lashing aggressively against the reinforced glass windows of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, a fitting reflection of Valerie Sterling's internal state. Valerie was running on fumes, having slept a grand total of 4 hours over the past 3 days. At 42, she was a titan in the private equity sector, specifically known for orchestrating ruthless corporate turnarounds. For the last 72 hours, she had been locked in a windowless boardroom, hammering out the final agonizing details of a massive corporate acquisition. Her firm, Sterling Global, had just finalized a hostile takeover of Horizon Wings Airlines, a mid-tier, struggling carrier plagued by plummeting stocks, terrible customer service ratings, and a toxic corporate culture. Valerie had bought the airline to gut its inefficient management and rebuild it from the ground up. But right now, Valerie didn't look like a billionaire CEO. She looked like a tired traveler who just wanted to go home to London. She wore a high-end but unassuming grey cashmere hoodie, a pair of dark Lululemon leggings, and white sneakers. Her natural hair was pulled back into a simple, unbothered puff. She carried no designer handbag, just a battered leather briefcase that held documents worth more than the airplane she was about to board. Flight 88 to London Heathrow was boarding, and as a first-class passenger, Valerie was among the first to walk down the jet bridge. She stepped onto the aircraft, welcomed by the sterile, familiar scent of recycled cabin air and citrus air freshener. Standing at the entrance of the cabin was Beatrice Bams. Beatrice was a senior flight attendant who wore her 20 years of seniority like a crown. Her uniform was impeccably pressed, her blonde hair sprayed into a rigid, immovable helmet, and her lips painted a harsh, unforgiving red. Beatrice was known among her colleagues as a strict enforcer of the unwritten rules of flying, which usually meant catering excessively to wealthy-looking white men while finding excuses to discipline anyone she deemed out of place. As Valerie stepped into the cabin and turned left toward the first-class section, Beatrice's forced corporate smile faltered. Her eyes instantly performed a top-to-bottom assessment of Valerie. She took in the hoodie, the leggings, the sneakers, and inevitably the color of Valerie's skin. "Excuse me, ma'am." Beatrice's voice cut through the hum of the aircraft engines. It was coated in a sickly sweet tone that barely concealed its condescension. "Economy seating is down the aisle and to your right. You're heading into first class." Valerie didn't stop walking. She was too tired for this. She simply held up her boarding pass. "I know. Seat 1A. She slipped into the spacious, leather-bound seat at the bulkhead, letting out a long sigh as she stowed her briefcase under the ottoman. She closed her eyes, preparing to tune out the world for the next 8 hours. But Beatrice wasn't having it. The flight attendant marched over to seat 1A, her heels clicking aggressively against the carpet. "Mom, I am going to need to see that boarding pass again," Beatrice demanded, looming over Valerie with her hands planted firmly on her hips. Valerie opened one eye. "I just showed it to you." "You flashed a piece of paper at me," Beatrice corrected, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the other boarding passengers. "This cabin is reserved for our premium ticket holders. Sometimes passengers get confused about the cabin layout. I need to verify your assignment." Valerie took a slow, deep breath. She reached into her pocket, retrieved the heavy cardstock boarding pass, and handed it over. It clearly read, "Stern, Ling, Valerie. Flight HW88, Seat 1A. First class. Beatrice stared at the boarding pass as if it were written in alien language, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitted together in sheer disbelief. She flipped it over, examining the magnetic strip before looking back down at Valerie's casual attire. "There must be a glitch in the system," Beatrice announced, handing the pass back with a rigid, dismissive flick of her wrist. "Or this is a non-revenue standby ticket that was printed in error. Did an employee give you a buddy pass?" "No," Valerie said, her voice remaining perfectly level, though a dangerous, cold edge began to bleed into her tone. "I purchased that ticket. It is not an error." "Well, I find that very hard to believe," Beatrice sneered, a mask of customer service completely slipping. "Seat 1A is our most expensive suite. It is usually reserved for our top-tier loyalty members, people who fly with us regularly." That implication hung heavy and toxic in the air. "People who don't look like you." A tall, white man in a sharp, bespoke suit brushed past Beatrice and took his seat across the aisle in 1B. This was Julian Reed, a venture capitalist who flew this route weekly. He glanced at Valerie, then at Beatrice, and let out an exasperated sigh. "Is there a problem, Beatrice?" Julian asked, checking his Rolex. "I have a board meeting in London at 9 a.m. We can't afford delays because someone doesn't know where their seat is." "I'm sorting it out right now, Mr. Reed," Beatrice cooed, her tone instantly transforming into one of absolute subservience. She turned back to Valerie, the harshness returning to her eyes. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step into the galley while I verify this ticket with the gate agent. We need to keep the aisle clear for our actual premium passengers." Valerie did not move. She leaned back in her seat, crossed her legs, and stared directly into Beatrice's eyes. "I am not moving," Valerie stated, a voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. "I am in the seat I paid for. If you have an issue with the ticketing system, you can resolve it without disturbing me further. Now I would like a glass of sparkling water, please." Beatrice's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. She was not used to being spoken to this way, certainly not by someone she had already mentally relegated to the bottom of the social hierarchy. "You will move when I tell you to move," Beatrice hissed, leaning in close so only Valerie could hear. "This is my cabin. I decide who sits here. And you do not belong here." The boarding process slowed to a crawl as the tension radiating from the front row bottlenecked the aisle. Passengers shuffling toward the back of the plane blatantly stared, whispering to one another. Valerie remained a statue of composure, which only seemed to infuriate Beatrice further. "I am warning you," Beatrice said, her voice trembling with a potent mix of rage and offended entitlement. "If you do not comply with a crew member's instructions, you are committing a federal offense. I will have you removed. A crew member's instructions must pertain to safety or valid airline policy," Valerie replied, reciting the Federal Aviation Administration guidelines with chilling precision. "Your personal discomfort with my presence in first class falls under neither category. I suggest you go about your duties before you make a mistake you cannot afford." Julian Reed chuckled from across the aisle. "Just go back to coach, lady. You're holding up the whole plane. Some of us actually have important places to be." Valerie didn't even turn her head to acknowledge Julian. She kept her eyes locked on Beatrice. "Are you going to get my water, or do I need to ask another flight attendant?" Beatrice spun on her heel and marched furiously toward the front galley, snatching the interphone off its cradle. Valerie could hear the frantic, hushed, and venomous whispers as Beatrice called the captain. She was clearly spinning a narrative, painting Valerie not as a paying passenger, but as an aggressive, unruly interloper who was threatening the safety of the flight. A few moments later, the heavy reinforced door of the cockpit swung open. Captain Richard Caldwell stepped out. Caldwell was a man who looked exactly like the stereotypical airline pilot, silver hair, square jaw, and an aura of arrogant authority. He had been flying for Horizon Wings for 25 years, and was notorious for running his aircraft like a military dictatorship. He walked over to seat 1A, adjusting his gold-striped epaulets, with Beatrice hovering right behind his shoulder, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Is there a problem here?" Captain Caldwell asked, his voice booming through the quiet cabin. He didn't ask it as a question to gather information. He asked it as a challenge. "Yes, Captain," Beatrice chimed in quickly, not giving Valerie a chance to speak. "This passenger is refusing to vacate a seat she doesn't hold a valid reservation for. She has been combative, dismissive, and is causing a disturbance among our VIP flyers." She gestured toward Julian, who nodded in agreement. "She's been extremely rude to your staff, Captain," Julian added unhelpfully, sipping a pre-flight mimosa. Captain Caldwell looked down at Valerie. He didn't ask to see her boarding pass. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He had already made his decision based entirely on Beatrice's word and his own implicit biases. "Miss, I'm going to need you to gather your things and follow Beatrice to the back of the aircraft," Caldwell said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We have a weight and balance issue, and we also need this seat for a deadheading crew member." It was a blatant, clumsy lie. Valerie knew the operational protocols of Horizon Wings better than the man currently wearing its uniform. Deadheading crew members were never prioritized over paid first-class revenue passengers unless it was a critical operational emergency. And even then, there was a specific protocol for compensation and downgrading that wasn't being followed. "Captain Caldwell," Valerie said, reading his name tag. "I am fully aware of FAA regulations regarding weight and balance on a Boeing 777. One passenger moving from first class to economy will not alter the center of gravity enough to matter. Furthermore, if you are bumping a revenue passenger for a deadhead, federal law requires you to offer compensation and ask for volunteers first." Caldwell's eyes widened slightly. He clearly hadn't expected a woman in sweatpants to intimately know aviation logistics and federal law, but his surprise quickly morphed into defensive anger. His authority was being questioned in front of his crew and his most important passengers. "I am the captain of this aircraft," Caldwell said, lowering his voice to a menacing growl. "My word is the final law on this plane. If I say you move, you move. If you refuse, I will categorize you as a security threat, and I will have the police drag you off my airplane in handcuffs. The choice is yours." Valerie felt a cold, sharp anger crystallizing in her chest. She had spent her entire life navigating rooms full of men who looked and acted exactly like Richard Caldwell and Julian Reed. Men who assumed power was their birthright and who viewed her very existence in their spaces as an insult. For a brief, fleeting second, she considered pulling out her phone, logging into the corporate portal and showing them exactly who she was. She could end this in 10 seconds. But as she looked at Beatrice's smug face and Caldwell's arrogant posture, a different thought occurred to her. If this was how they treated her, someone they perceived as a powerless minority passenger, how many other people had they bullied, humiliated, and degraded over the years? Horizon Wings had a terrible reputation for a reason. The rot wasn't just in the boardroom, it was right here, on the front lines, wearing the company uniform. If she revealed herself now, they would apologize, grovel, and pretend it was all a big misunderstanding. They would save their jobs, and they would continue to treat people like garbage when the boss wasn't looking. No. Valerie needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go. She needed to witness the full extent of the infection she had just spent $4 billion to cure. "Captain," Valerie said softly, her eyes deadlocked on his, "I strongly advise you to reconsider this course of action. If you have me removed from this plane today, it will be the greatest professional mistake of your life. And yours, Beatrice." Caldwell scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Are you threatening my crew?" "I am giving you a statement of fact," Valerie replied. Caldwell turned to Beatrice. "Call the terminal. Get airport police down here right now. We are offloading a disruptive passenger." The delay had now stretched past 20 minutes. The cabin was sweltering, the air conditioning struggling to keep up while the plane sat stationary at the gate. Murmurs of frustration rippled through the economy cabin, though in first class, the atmosphere was a toxic mix of morbid curiosity and quiet approval from passengers like Julian. 10 minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. 2 armed officers from the Chicago Department of Aviation Police stepped onto the aircraft. The lead officer, a burly man whose name badge read Miller, looked around, his hand resting instinctively near his utility belt. "We got a call about a disturbance?" Officer Miller asked, looking at Captain Caldwell. "Right here, officer," Beatrice said eagerly, pointing a manicured finger at Valerie. "This woman refuses to leave first class, refuses to follow crew instructions, and just threatened the captain. We want her off the plane." Officer Miller turned his gaze to Valerie. He saw a black woman sitting quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, looking perfectly serene. He frowned, looking back at Caldwell. Did she physically assault anyone? "She is being verbally abusive and non-compliant," Caldwell lied without hesitation. "I am the pilot in command, and I want her removed for the safety of my flight. Under aviation law, the captain's word is essentially gospel while the aircraft is under his command. The police officers, regardless of what they actually believed, had a duty to enforce the captain's request to remove a passenger." Officer Miller stepped forward, his expression hardening into professional detachment. "Mom, you need to gather your belongings and come with us. If you refuse, we will have to use force, and you will be placed under arrest." Phones were already out. From the rows behind first class, Valerie could see the small, glowing red recording dots of a half-dozen smartphones. People were filming her. The angry black woman trope was about to be broadcasted to millions on TikTok and Twitter, devoid of context, framed by a malicious flight attendant and a complicit captain. The humiliation was designed to break her. Beatrice stood in the galley, practically vibrating with triumphant glee. She had won. She had put this woman in her place. Valerie slowly reached down and pulled her battered leather briefcase from beneath the ottoman. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her Lululemon leggings. She looked around the first-class cabin, making eye contact with Julian, who smirked and raised his mimosa glass in a mock toast. She looked at Caldwell, who stood tall, proud of his petty display of power. And finally she looked at Beatrice. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," Beatrice whispered as Valerie stepped into the aisle. "You should have just gone to the back where you belong. Not at Matsien." Valerie paused, leaning in just slightly so only Beatrice and Caldwell could hear her over the hum of the air conditioning. "Enjoy the flight, Beatrice," Valerie said, a voice devoid of any anger, replacing it with a terrifying absolute calm. "It will be the last one you ever work." She turned and walked gracefully off the aircraft, escorted by the 2 armed police officers. The walk down the jet bridge was silent, save for the hum of the airport machinery and the heavy boots of the cops. Once they were halfway up the jet bridge, well out of sight of the aircraft, Officer Miller turned to her, his posture relaxing slightly. "Look, lady," Miller said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "I don't know what happened in there, but when the captain makes the call, my hands are tied. We're going to have to escort you back to the terminal. Are you going to cause any trouble?" "No, Officer Miller," Valerie said politely. "I have no intention of causing you any trouble. You are just doing your job. However, I need to make one phone call. It will take 30 seconds. Miller hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick." Valerie pulled her smartphone from her pocket. She didn't dial a number, she simply pressed a speed dial contact labeled M. Thorne. Secure. It rang exactly twice. "Mitchell," Valerie said, her voice echoing slightly in the hollow metal tube of the jet bridge. Mitchell Thorne was the chief operating officer of Horizon Wings. He had been retained by Valerie's firm specifically to act as the brutal enforcer during the upcoming corporate restructuring. He was currently sitting in the airline's corporate headquarters in Dallas, likely drinking his 5th espresso of the day. "Miss Sterling," Mitchell's sharp professional voice came through the speaker. "I thought you were in the air. The closing went through 20 minutes ago. The wire transfer's cleared. Horizon Wings is officially the property of Sterling Global. Congratulations, boss." "Thank you, Mitchell," Valerie said calmly, staring out the window of the jet bridge at the massive tail fin of the Boeing 7777 she had just been kicked off of. "There's been a slight change of plans regarding my travel. Is there a problem with Flight 88? "Yes, a systemic one," Valerie replied. "Mitchell, I need you to pull the manifest for Flight 88 out of O'Hare. Cross-reference the crew schedule. I want the names of the pilot in command and the senior purser." There was the sound of rapid typing on the other end of a line. "Dot it. Captain Richard Caldwell and Senior Flight Attendant Beatrice Vance. Do you need me to arrange a VIP greeting for you in London?" "No," Valerie said, her eyes narrowing as she watched the baggage handlers loading cargo into the belly of her airplane. "I need you to fire them." There was a beat of stunned silence on the phone. "Ma'am, fire them? They are currently in the pre-flight sequence. If I terminate the pilot and senior person now, the flight will be grounded. It will cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays, rebookings, and FAA fines, not to mention the union blowback." "Not, it's, but, "Mitchell," Valerie said, her voice dropping an octave, radiating the sheer, unadulterated power that had made her a legend on Wall Street. "I did not buy this airline to inherit its liabilities. I bought it to exterminate them. These two employees just weaponized airport police to forcibly remove the majority shareholder of this airline from her seat because they didn't like the color of her skin or the clothes she was wearing." Another beat of silence, then Mitchell's voice changed. The corporate hesitation vanished, replaced by the cold, efficient tone of an executioner. "I understand completely, Miss Sterling." "So, go. How?" "I don't want them fired when they land in London," Valerie instructed, her eyes fixed on the cockpit window where she could just barely see Caldwell's silhouette settling into his seat. "I want them fired right now, while they're sitting on the tarmac. I want you to call the gate agent at B-14, have them open that aircraft door and strip them of their credentials in front of the very passengers they just tried to impress. Do it now. Consider it done, Valerie. I'm calling O'Hare Operations right now." Valerie hung up the phone and slipped it back into her pocket. She turned to Officer Miller, who was staring at her with his mouth slightly open, having heard the entire conversation. "Officer," Valerie smiled, a genuine, terrifyingly bright smile, "do you mind if we wait right here for just a few more minutes? The show is about to begin." Inside the cabin of Flight 88, a false sense of victory had settled over the first-class section. Beatrice Vance glided down the aisle with a renewed spring in her step, her chin tilted upward in triumph. She carried a silver tray lined with fresh, hot hand towels, distributing them to the premium passengers with a sickeningly sweet smile. She had successfully defended her territory. She had exercised her power, and the disruptive element had been purged. "Sorry about that little disturbance, Mr. Reed," Beatrice cooed, offering Julian a towel with a pair of silver tongs. "Some people just don't understand how things work. We'll be pushing back from the gate momentarily." Julian Reed wiped his hands, chuckling, as he took another sip of his mimosa. "Good riddance. You handled it perfectly, Beatrice. I'll be sure to write a letter of commendation to corporate. Unbelievable entitlement these days. Thank you, Mr. Reed." "That means the world to me," she replied, her chest swelling with pride. Up in the cockpit, Captain Richard Caldwell settled into the left seat, adjusting his headset. He flicked the intercom switch, bringing the cabin public address system to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Caldwell's deep, resonant voice echoed through the plane, dripping with manufactured reassurance. I want to apologize for the slight delay in our departure. We had a minor security issue regarding a non-compliant passenger, but it has been resolved. Safety is our #1 priority here at Horizon Wings. Flight attendants prepared doors for departure and cross-check. At the boarding door, junior flight attendant Chloe, who had watched the entire debacle with silent, terrified discomfort, reached out to pull the heavy aircraft door shut. Suddenly, a hand slammed against the exterior of the door. David Collins, the lead gate agent for B-14, stood breathless in the doorway. He was a veteran employee, known for his unflappable demeanor, but right now, he looked as though he had just seen a ghost. His face was entirely drained of color, his breathing shallow and rapid. He held a walkie-talkie in one hand and a mobile phone in the other. "Stop!" David gasped, physically wedging his shoulder into the door frame to prevent Chloe from closing it. "Do not close this door." Beatrice, who had just returned to the front galley to secure the catering carts, whirled around, her eyes flashing with irritation. "David, what are you doing? The captain just gave the order. We are D0. We need to push back right now." David ignored her completely. His hands were shaking as he raised the walkie-talkie. "Captain Caldwell, I need you to step out of the flight deck immediately. Beatrice, stay right where you are." "Excuse me?" Beatrice snapped, her hands going to her hips, ready to dress down the gate agent. "You do not give orders on this aircraft. Get out of the doorway before I report you for interfering with a flight crew." "No talks, my time back. Then you be super. The cockpit door unlatched and swung open. Captain Caldwell leaned out, his brow furrowed in deep, thunderous anger. "David, have you lost your mind? We are 10 minutes behind schedule. Shut the door and pull the jet bridge." "I can't do that, Captain," David said, his voice trembling but resolute. He held up his mobile phone. The screen displayed an active call. "I have Mitchell Thorne on the line, the Chief Operating Officer in Dallas." The mention of the COO caused a momentary ripple of confusion in the galley. It was incredibly rare for a C-suite executive to directly call a gate desk, let alone halt a departing international flight. "I don't care if the President of the United States is on the phone," Caldwell growled, stepping fully out of the cockpit, his face flushing red. "I am the pilot in command of this aircraft. I am initiating the pushback sequence. We can talk to Dallas when we land in London." "Captain, you don't understand," David said, swallowing hard. He pressed the speakerphone button, holding the device up so the entire front section of the plane, including Julian Reed and the rest of first class, could hear. "Captain Caldwell, this is Mitchell Thorne." The COO's voice crackled through the speaker, devoid of any pleasantries. The sheer, freezing authority in Thorne's voice caused the ambient chatter in the cabin to instantly die down. "You will not be pushing back. As of exactly 2 minutes ago, you are relieved of your command." Caldwell froze, his brain struggling to process the words. "Mitchell, what the hell is going on? We just offloaded a security threat. Are we grounded?" "The flight is not grounded, Richard, but you are," Thorne snapped, the ice in his voice hardening. "You are to power down the aircraft, pack your flight bag, and exit the plane immediately. The same goes for Senior Sir Beatrice Vance. Turn in your crew badges to the gate agent. Your employment with Horizon Wings is terminated, effective immediately." A deafening silence slammed into the first-class cabin. Beatrice physically staggered backward, her shoulder hitting the metal bulkhead. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face, leaving her pale and wide-eyed. "Terminated," Caldwell repeated, a hysterical, disbelieving laugh escaping his throat. "On what grounds? For removing an unruly passenger? That's FAA protocol, Thorne. You can't fire me for following safety procedures. I have 30 years of service. I'll have the union strip you bare." "You didn't remove an unruly passenger, Richard." Thorne's voice echoed through the silent cabin, sharp as a guillotine blade. "You colluded with a flight attendant to illegally and maliciously evict a first-class revenue passenger without cause. And you didn't just evict a passenger. You evicted Valerie Sterling. In seat 1B, Julian Reed's mimosa glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the carpet, splashing orange juice across his expensive leather shoes. Julian's jaw unhinged. He knew that name. Everyone in the financial sector knew that name. Valerie Sterling was a titan, a brutal, brilliant billionaire who devoured failing companies and left scorched earth in her wake. The sale of Horizon Wings closed 20 minutes ago, Thorne continued, driving the nail directly into the coffin. Valerie Sterling is the CEO of Sterling Global. She is the new majority shareholder of this airline. You just called the police on the woman who owns the plane you were standing on. Hand over your badges. Dallas HR will email your separation paperwork. Thorne out. The line went dead. The swidering enfolding of the mud was heavy and suffocating. Beatrice let out a small, strangled whimper. Her eyes darted wildly around the cabin, seeking support, seeking an ally. But there was none. Julian Reed was staring straight ahead, looking visibly nauseated, suddenly terrified that his own complicity might somehow get back to his firm. The other passengers who just minutes ago had viewed Beatrice as a figure of authority now stared at her with a mixture of shock and dawning schadenfreude. "This is a mistake," Beatrice whispered, her hand shaking violently. It was just she was wearing a hoodie. She didn't look like what, Beatrice? David asked softly, though the judgment in his voice was unmistakable. Like she belonged? Captain Caldwell stood frozen, the arrogant posture he had carried for 3 decades completely shattered. The realization of his colossal, career-ending mistake washed over him. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't looked at the manifest. He had trusted his own bloated ego and Beatrice's prejudiced assumptions. In doing so, he had handed the execution of the axe. "David," Caldwell croaked, his voice entirely stripped of its former boom. "Let me talk to her. Where is she? Let me apologize." "She doesn't want your apologies, Captain," David said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the jet bridge. "She wants you off her airplane. Now." The walk from the front galley to the boarding door was only a few feet, but the Captain, Richard Caldwell, and Beatrice Spence, it felt like an agonizing death march. Word had already spread like wildfire down the aisles. The passengers in economy, who had watched the initial confrontation with muted outrage, now realized exactly what was happening. As Beatrice retrieved her rolling tote bag from the front closet, a slow, solitary clap started from somewhere in row 12. It was joined by another, and then another. By the time Beatrice and Caldwell were walking toward the exit, scattered applause and jeers echoed through the cabin. "Not so tough now, are you?" a voice called out from the back. Beatrice kept her head down, tears actively ruining her heavy mascara, carving dark, ugly tracks down her cheeks. Caldwell carried his pilot's bag, his face a mask of humiliated devastation. He couldn't make eye contact with anyone. He passed Julian Reed, who completely ignored him, frantically typing on his phone, presumably doing damage control with his own corporate office, just in case his face appeared in any of the passenger videos. They stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge. The cool, damp air of the terminal corridor offered no comfort. Standing exactly where they had left her was Valerie Sterling. Beatrice leaning casually against the red metal wall of the jet bridge, her arms crossed over her gray cashmere hoodie. Officer Miller stood a few feet away, a massive, delighted grin threatening to break across his usually stoic face. He had clearly put the pieces together and was enjoying the unprecedented front-row seat to corporate karma. As Caldwell and Beatrice approached, Valerie didn't move. She didn't blare. She simply looked at them with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor she was about to excise. "Miss Sterling," Caldwell started, his voice cracking. The authoritative captain was gone. In his place was a desperate, panicked man. "Please, let me explain. This was a catastrophic misunderstanding. Beatrice told me you were a security risk, that you were refusing orders. As the pilot, I have to trust my crew. I didn't know who you were. Valerie tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing right through him. "That is the exact problem, Mr. Caldwell. You didn't know who I was. You thought I was just an ordinary woman. You thought I had no power, no voice, and no recourse. And because you believed I was a nobody, you felt entirely comfortable treating me like garbage." She pushed herself off the wall, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "If I had been wearing a Chanel suit, or if I had been a white man in a bespoke blazer like the gentleman in seat 1B, you would have verified my ticket. You would have asked questions. Well, instead you utilized the police to publicly humiliate me based on an assumption. You do not belong in a leadership role, and you certainly do not belong in the cockpit of my airline." Caldwell flinched as if he had been struck. He opened his mouth to argue about union protections, about due process, but the words died in his throat. He knew the zero-tolerance clauses regarding gross negligence and discrimination. He was done. Beatrice, unable to contain herself any longer, broke down into heavy, gasping sobs. "I'm sorry," Beatrice cried, clutching the handle of her luggage like a lifeline. "I'm so sorry, Miss Sterling. I have kids in college. I've been flying for 20 years. Please, this is my whole life. It was a mistake. I was stressed. Please don't take my pension." Valerie turned her attention to the weeping flight attendant. There was no pity in Valerie's eyes. She had spent decades fighting through an industry designed to keep women like her out, and she had no sympathy for those who weaponized their petty power to stomp on others. "Your pension is intact, Beatrice, though your severance is voided," Valerie said, her voice remaining perfectly level and dangerously calm. "But your career in aviation is over. A mistake is forgetting to load the catering carts. A mistake is mixing up a seating assignment. What you did was intentional. You profiled me, you harassed me, and you lied to your captain to have me forcibly removed because my presence in your cabin offended your delicate sensibilities." Valerie extended her right hand, palm up. "Your badges, both of them." Now, Caldwell, his shoulders completely slumped in defeat, reached up and unclipped his security badge, handing it over. Beatrice fumbled with her lanyard, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to detach the plastic ID card. She dropped it into Valerie's palm. "Officer Miller," Valerie said, not taking her eyes off the 2 disgraced employees. "Yes, ma'am," the cop responded eagerly. "These 2 individuals are no longer employees of Horizon Wings Airlines. As such, they do not have clearance to be in a secure terminal area without valid boarding passes. Please escort them out of the airport." Miller nodded, stepping forward and gesturing back up the jet bridge toward the terminal. "All right, folks, let's go." Long walk to the parking garage. Beatrice let out a loud, pathetic wail as she turned and began the long walk up the incline, dragging her luggage behind her. Caldwell followed in silence, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Valerie watched them until they disappeared through the terminal doors. She looked down at the 2 plastic ID badges in her hand. A pilot with 30 years of experience. A flight attendant with 20. 2 careers, vaporized in less than 20 minutes, all because they couldn't see past their own arrogance. David Collins, the gate agent, cleared his throat nervously from the doorway of the aircraft. "Miss Sterling?" David asked, his voice full of profound respect. "I have dispatch on the line. We have a reserve pilot and a reserve purser in the crew lounge. They can be here in 15 minutes. Do you still wish to travel with us today?" Mallory let out a long, exhausted breath. She looked at her phone. She was incredibly tired, but there was work to be done. The rut had been exposed, but the healing had to start immediately. "Yes, David," Valerie said, picking up her battered leather briefcase. "I have a seat waiting for me." "And David?" "Yes, Mom." "Calm. You handled yourself exceptionally well today under bizarre circumstances," Valerie noted, offering him a genuine, appreciative smile. "Expect a call from Dallas tomorrow." We are going to need new management in terminal operations." David's eyes widened in shock and gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Sterling." "Thank you." Valerie walked back onto the aircraft. As she stepped through the door, the remaining flight attendants stood perfectly at attention, looking at her with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't scowl at them. She offered a polite nod and turned left into the first-class cabin. As she walked down the aisle towards seat 1A, the cabin was completely silent. Julian Reed was shrinking into the leather upholstery of seat 1B, aggressively pretending to read a financial magazine that he was holding upside down. Valerie slid her briefcase under the ottoman, sat down in her seat, and crossed her legs. She looked across the aisle at Julian. "Mr. Reed," Mallory said softly. Julian flinched, lowering the magazine slowly. His face was a mask of sheer panic. "Miss Sterling, I didn't realize." "I apologize if I believe," Valerie interrupted, her voice dripping with ice, "you owe me an apology for your behavior, and I suggest, for the sake of your firm's future dealings with Sterling Global, that you learn how to speak to people regardless of where they are sitting on an airplane." "Yes, Mom." "Mom, absolutely," and Julian stammered, looking thoroughly nauseated. Valerie turned her attention forward, closing her eyes as she settled into the plush seat. The new crew would arrive soon. The flight would be delayed, but it would take off under a new command. The hostile takeover was officially complete. Horizon Wings had a new boss, and the skies were about to get much, much friendlier. 15 minutes later, the heavy door of the Boeing 777 opened to admit the reserve crew. The contrast could not have been more stark. Captain Elias Montgomery, a soft-spoken veteran pilot with a spotless safety record and the reputation for treating his crew like family, stepped on board alongside Evelyn Davis, a senior person known for her flawless de-escalation skills. Evelyn walked straight to the front galley, assessing the tension that still hung in the air like thick smoke. She caught the eye of junior flight attendant Chloe, who was still trembling slightly from the ordeal. Evelyn placed a gentle, reassuring hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "Take a breath, sweetheart," Evelyn murmured softly. "The storm is over. Let's get these people to London safely." Captain Montgomery stepped out of the flight deck, his eyes scanning the first-class cabin before settling on seat 1A. He didn't strut. He walked with quiet, respectful authority. He paused beside Valerie, leaning down slightly. "Miss Sterling," Captain Montgomery said, his voice a steady, calming baritone. "I've been briefed by dispatch. On behalf of the flight deck, I want to personally apologize for the unacceptable delay and the appalling treatment you endured. My crew and I are entirely at your service, and we are ready for pushback whenever you give the word." Valerie looked up from her laptop, the harsh lines of her face softening just a fraction. "Thank you, Captain Montgomery. The delay was unfortunate, but the purge was necessary. You have the aircraft. Let's fly." With a nod, Montgomery returned to the cockpit. Minutes later, his voice came over the calm, professional, devoid of the arrogant bluster his predecessor had weaponized. The doors were cross-checked, the massive engine spooled up with a deep, vibrating hum, and Flight A8 finally pushed back from Gate B14. Leaving the shattered careers of Richard Caldwell and Beatrice Vance on the tarmac. As the plane climbed through the heavy Chicago rain clouds and broke into the blinding, brilliant sunlight of the upper atmosphere, the true fallout of the gate incident began to materialize. When the aircraft reached cruising altitude and the Wi-Fi connected, Valerie's phone began to vibrate with manic intensity. Notifications flooded her screen. Texts, emails, and news alerts cascaded in a relentless digital waterfall. During the 45-minute delay, the passengers in economy had not been idle. The videos they had recorded of Beatrice harassing Valerie, of Captain Caldwell bringing the police on board, and the incredibly satisfying audio of Mitchell Thorne firing the duo over the gate agent's speakerphone had hit the internet. The digital world is a powder keg of outrage, and this incident was a perfectly lit match. Within an hour, the hashtag NubFlight88 was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The public narrative had taken a massive, unprecedented twist. Usually, when a passenger is harassed on a flight, the airline faces a catastrophic public relations crisis. Stock prices plummet, boycotts are organized, and executives are dragged before cameras to offer hollow, sweat-drenched apologies. But Valerie's ruthless, instantaneous execution of justice flipped the script entirely. The internet wasn't destroying Horizon Wings, they were loudly and aggressively applauding its new owner. The videos were being framed not as an airline failing, but as a billionaire CEO actively cleaning house and defending her own dignity, while simultaneously standing up for every passenger who had ever been mistreated by an arrogant crew. The Beatrice read a headline from a major financial blog that had already posted a hastily written article about the stealth acquisition. Valerie tapped into her secure email and saw a message from her PR director at Sterling Global. "Valerie, the viral videos are doing our marketing for us." Horizon Wings' stock was down 12% at the opening bell. Since the video of the firing leaked, the stock has surged 18%. The public loves the zero-tolerance accountability. We are trending higher than we have in 5 years. What's your next move? Valerie smiled, a sharp, calculating expression. She typed a rapid reply, draft a press release, acknowledge the incident, announce a system-wide retraining protocol for all customer-facing staff, effective midnight tonight. Any employee found violating our anti-discrimination policy will be terminated with cause, no severance. Let the union know I'm looking forward to their cooperation. She hit send and closed her laptop, finally taking a moment to breathe. The cabin was quiet. The only sound, the soothing rush of air slipping over the fuselage. Then, a shadow fell over her tray table. Julian Reed was standing in the aisle. The arrogant swagger he had carried during boarding had completely evaporated. He looked like a man walking toward a firing squad. His expensive tie was slightly loosened and he was sweating. "Miss Sterling," Julian started, his voice barely above a desperate whisper. "May I have a moment of your time?" Valerie didn't look at him immediately. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water, letting the silence stretch until it became agonizingly uncomfortable for the venture capitalist. Finally, she turned her gaze toward him. "I cannot imagine what we have to discuss, Mr. Chaw." "Reed," Valerie said coldly. Julian swallowed hard, gripping the back of the empty seat next to him. "I just saw the news alerts on the plane's Wi-Fi. I realize now that my comments earlier were entirely inappropriate. I was stressed about a merger, and I took it out on the situation. I deeply regret my lack of decorum." "Your decorum is of no interest to me," Valerie replied, her eyes narrowing. "Your complicity in racism and classism, however, is a different matter. You saw an opportunity to punch down, and you took it eagerly." "I know, and I am profoundly sorry," Julian pleaded, his professional survival instincts kicking into overdrive. "Miss Sterling, my firm, Vanguard Capital, is currently the lead underwriter for the Horizon Wings regional expansion contract. We've been working on this deal for 6 months. If my partners find out I insulted the new majority shareholder on her own plane, nuts. Wow. Valerie held up a single manicured finger, silencing him instantly. A cruel, brilliant realization dawned on her. Vanguard Capital, she knew that firm. During her due diligence before buying Horizon Wings, she had noted that Vanguard had been aggressively shorting the airline's stock, trying to drive the company into bankruptcy so they could strip it for parts. Julian wasn't just a rude passenger, he was one of the vultures who had helped plunge the airline into the very crisis she was now fixing. "Mr. Reed," Valerie said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register, "I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what Vanguard Capital has been doing to Horizon Wings over the last 4 quarters. You purposefully stalled the regional expansion funding to tank our Q3 valuations. Sob-ump. Julian's face went the color of ash. Miss Sterling, that's just business. We were leveraging our position. And now I am leveraging mine, Valerie interrupted, leaning forward. As of this moment, Vanguard Capital's underwriting contract is terminated. We will not be utilizing your capital. Furthermore, I will be legally contesting the penalty clauses in your contract based on bad faith negotiations. Julian stumbled back a step. You can't do that. It will cost your airline millions in bridge loan fees. I bought this airline in cash, Mr. Putton. Reed, I don't need your bridge loans, Valerie said, the absolute financial superiority in her voice crushing any argument he had left. You thought you were sitting next to a powerless woman you could mock for a cheap laugh. Instead, you insulted the woman who holds the pen to your most lucrative account. Go back to your seat. When we land in London, your firm will receive the termination notice. And Julian? Julian paused, looking utterly broken. Horizon Wings no longer desires your patronage, Valerie concluded. You are permanently banned from flying on this airline. Enjoy the flight. It will be your last one with us. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but the sheer, insurmountable wall of Valerie's power left him mute. He turned and practically collapsed back into seat 1B, staring blankly at the bulkhead for the remainder of the 8-hour flight, his career actively dissolving in his mind. Flight 88 touched down at London Heathrow exactly on time. Despite the delay in Chicago, Captain Montgomery had flown a brilliant fish and brute, picking up the tailwinds over the Atlantic. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, the atmosphere inside the cabin was electric. The passengers in economy, who had all been following the viral saga on their phones, were buzzing with adrenaline. They had witnessed a legendary piece of corporate history in real time. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, nobody stood up. In a rare, almost unprecedented display of airplane etiquette, the entire cabin waited. Evelyn Davis walked out of the front galley and approached Valerie. Miss Sterling, the local authorities and airport management have secured the gate area. There is quite a media presence waiting for you in the terminal. Would you like us to arrange a private exit through the tarmac? Valerie picked up her battered leather briefcase and stood. She smoothed down her gray hoodie. She wasn't going to hide. She had nothing to be ashamed of. The days of hiding behind corporate PR walls were over. No, Evelyn, I will walk through the front door, Valerie said. She turned to the rest of the cabin. She looked at the passengers who were peering through the curtains from business and economy. Thank you all for your patience today. Welcome to the New Horizon Wings. A spontaneous round of applause broke out, starting in the front rows and echoing all the way to the back of the massive aircraft. Valerie offered a gracious nod and stepped off the plane. The scene inside the Heathrow terminal was chaotic but controlled. Dozens of reporters, camera crews, and aviation journalists were pressed against the security stanchions. The mud was the first of the ridge. Camera flashes erupted like a lightning storm. Microphones were thrust in her direction. Miss Sterling, is it true you fired the captain directly from the gate? Valerie, what is your comment on the viral videos? Will you be taking legal action against the former crew? Valerie stopped in the center of the terminal concourse. She didn't have a prepared speech. She didn't have notes. She simply possessed the unyielding clarity of a woman who had drawn a hard line in the sand and defended it. Ladies and gentlemen, Valerie's voice projected clearly over the clamor of the press, commanding instant silence. Today I officially took ownership of Horizon Wings Airlines. For too long, this company has operated under a toxic culture of arrogance, prejudice, and zero accountability. This morning in Chicago, I experienced that culture firsthand. She looked directly into the lens of the nearest television camera. A company is only as good as the respect it shows its most vulnerable customers. The former employees involved in today's incident made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed power meant the ability to degrade others without consequence. They were wrong. Effective immediately, Horizon Wings will become the global standard for passenger dignity. We are overhauling our entire management structure, our training protocols, and our customer service standards. If any employee feels that bigotry or classism is a perk of the uniform, I highly suggest they resign today. Because if I find out about it, your termination will be as swift and public as the one you witnessed this morning. A reporter from a prominent London financial paper shouted, "What about the passengers who witnessed this?" "What's your message to them?" Valerie smiled, a genuine, powerful expression. "My message is simple. The skies belong to everyone. And under my watch, you will be treated with the respect you deserve, whether you are wearing a bespoke suit or a pair of sweatpants." "Thank you." She didn't take any more questions. Surrounded by airport security, she walked through the terminal, an unstoppable force of nature, stepping out into the cool, misty London air. Back in Chicago, reality was crashing down on the former crew. Beatrice Vance sat in her car in the employee parking lot, crying hysterically as her teenage daughter tested her links to the viral videos. Her face was plastered across every social media platform, forever immortalized as the villain of Flight 88. Her career in aviation was dead. No airline would ever hire a liability that famous. Captain Richard Caldwell sat at an airport bar, staring into a glass of cheap whiskey. His union rep had already called, informing him that because he had blatantly violated anti-discrimination protocols, the union could not defend his termination. His pension was intact, but his reputation, his entire identity as a respected aviator, was permanently destroyed. He was a laughingstock, outsmarted and outplayed by a woman he hadn't even bothered to look at. And high in a high-rise office building in London, the partners of Vanguard Capital were busy drafting termination papers for Julian Reed, desperate to distance themselves from his radioactive public relations disaster before Valerie Sterling could crush their remaining portfolios. The drama that began with a simple demand for a boarding pass had ended with a corporate empire being rebuilt from the ground up. Valerie Sterling hadn't just bought an airline. She had weaponized her success to deliver a brutal, unforgettable masterclass in respect, proving that true power isn't about how loudly you can yell, but how swiftly you can act when the truth is revealed. What an absolutely incredible journey of justice and corporate karma. Valerie Sterling proved that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. She took a moment of blatant discrimination and turned it into a global masterclass on dignity, accountability, and ruthless leadership, ensuring that no one on her planes would ever be treated like a second-class citizen again. The way she handled the crew and the arrogant Julian Reed was nothing short of legendary. If the story of immediate justice, thrilling twists, and holding the powerful accountable had you on the edge of your seat, please like this video and share it with anyone who loves a brilliant real-life comeback story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our deep dives into the most dramatic, jaw-dropping stories from around the world. Drop a comment below. How would you have handled Beatrice and the captain? Let's discuss.